Hello and welcome to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we discuss films that we think are underrated, underappreciated, or we just want to talk about them. This week it was Alice's turn to pick, and she went with Kevin and Perry Go Large. So let's get into it. So, Alice, Kevin and Perry Go Large.
You're laughing again, Josh. This is becoming a common theme whenever
I'm
we do
excited.
a film that I have picked.
I am excited, that's why I'm laughing. I'm excited for this one. So, as we've already said, we're discussing Kevin and Perry Go Large from the year 2000, so spoiler warnings if you've not seen it. Alice, what is it about, and why did you pick it?
So Kevin and Perry Go Large is a film that follows the story of Kevin and Perry. Now, these are two characters who, if you're not from the UK or if maybe you're a little bit younger, they were quite famous in the 90s, kind of towards the early 2000s as part of a show called Harry Enfield and Chums, which was a bit of a sketch show, bit of an impressionist show by a very famous impressionist in this country anyway, called Harry Enfield. And he plays Kevin, and then Kathy Burke plays Perry. So Kevin is a very moody teenager. You know, he's like a rebel without a cause. He hates his mum and dad, but for no real good reason. Like they're nice, they have a nice home, and he has a nice life. But he's just, you know, I hate you, mum and dad, all this kind of standard teenage rhetoric. And then his friend Perry, who's played by Kathy Burke, he's a little bit a bit sweeter, a bit more polite. You know, he refers to Kevin's mum and dad as Mrs Patterson and Mr Patterson, and he's always very nice to them when he goes round. And he's a bit more mellow. I guess he is kind of what you would think of like a classic pot smoker in the mid-90s, you know, with the hat, with the big tracksuit, and maybe just a little bit slower than the people around him at picking up on exactly what's going on. So the film follows them two basically in a quest to lose their virginity. They're sex mad. Kevin is desperate to have sex. So they make a plan to go to Ibiza, find some girls and have sex with them. And that is basically the main motivation of the film. They are also aspiring DJs. So they use the opportunity to try and get a gig and go and play in front of a crowd, which they actually end up doing thanks to Chris Evans' character, who I love, Eyeball Paul. He makes an appearance. And that's it, really, in a nutshell. But they do, you know what, they get the ladies in the end, and everybody has a really nice time, and they do a lot of shagging on the beach. And that's what you want from your sort of teen rom-com films, if you like. The reason I picked this one was because, again, as with many films that we've picked for this podcast, it just sort of popped into my head one day, and I was like, ooh, but like, let's see how this film did. Kind of not expecting it to have done really well. But I saw, and I know we usually save this till the end, but I will bring this up now. So it basically got 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which
Wow.
I know that isn't necessarily like an accurate sort of reading, is it? Because I think
like a
you've told me,
barometer, yeah.
I think you've told me, Josh, that if a film hasn't got enough reviews, then it just sort of automatically gets 0%. But one way or another, I thought, well, it's either underrated or underseen. It's got to be one of them getting 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I thought, yeah, let's give this a go. I didn't have high hopes, was very sort of nervous to see how it may have aged, but was interested to give it a go. So what about you, Josh? Had you seen this one?
I had seen it. That's why I was excited when you picked it. So I've got a lot of affection for this film. I think I was like about the right age when it came out. Obviously knew about Harry Enfield, knew about the characters, all that sort of thing. So I have fond memories of watching it. I was probably at the right age to watch it in terms of the comedy. So I was excited because I hadn't watched it. I've seen it plenty of times. It's one of those films that's quite often on telly or whatever. And I was quite trepidatious to revisit it, to be honest, because for the reasons you said, which I thought, I bet this got absolutely battered. And I also thought, you know, it's quite a daft film. It's quite a silly film. So has it aged really badly? Which I was sort of expecting as we went into it. So then in that case, let's get stuck into it. So are we saying as we go into this, you picked this because underrated?
So my initial motivation was underrated, but I would be more inclined to lean towards underseen as well because of that Rotten Tomatoes score, which for me kind of highlights that it is underseen. And I would assume that it wasn't huge amongst an international audience. And I would imagine that the people who have watched it and perhaps the people who do enjoy it are people who loved Harry Enfield and who loved Kevin and Perry, when the sketch show was on in the 90s. That's my assumption.
So it's a bit of both.
Bit of both, I think.
Bit of both.
Yeah.
Bit of both. Okay, so having rewatched it then, what did you think? What did you like?
So it's interesting when dissecting and looking at a film like this. So on the one hand, you could perhaps say that in some ways it has aged poorly. But in other ways, the whole thing is a satire and it is taking the piss out of these films that are completely centered around young men or boys' desire to have sex. And for me, it's really poking fun at those things. So you can forgive it for a lot of things, for the representation of young lads, for some of the representation of women, for some of the representation of people like Chris Evans, and you've got Paul Whitehouse, who's like the sort of bouncer for one of the clubs in Ibiza. It's poking fun at how these characters are usually represented in films, is what I felt. So you can forgive it for a lot of things. The main reason that this film is funny is because it's Harry Enfield and Kathy Burke that are playing those characters. It's a 40-ish-year-old man and a female comedian playing these 40, well, they're a bit older, aren't they? So Harry Enfield, it's Kevin and Perry together sort of started when they were about 14, 15 years old. But I suppose as they're going to Ibiza and they're getting drunk and going to clubs and stuff, they must be 18 at this point. And that is where a lot of the humour comes from. I think Kathy Burke is really, really good in this. She's incredibly physical. She's doing a lot with her body, a lot with her voice, and a lot with her face to kind of bring to life this kind of stonery, Oasis listening to, tracky wearing sort of lad from the mid-90s. And I think she does a really good job. Harry Enfield as well, really embodies that cranky teenager. We've got some brilliant lines that I feel like we can all maybe relate to when we were angry teenagers, but things like, I'm adopted, I'm running away, that is so unfair. And some of these lines became really iconic, or at least in our household. So we were a bit of a Harry Enfield household, like if it was on Saturday night, we were definitely watching it. I do think there's quite a good few bits of comedy in there. We've got some fun with kind of like wordplay and stuff. So there's one moment where Kevin's parents are reading his school report, which isn't very flattering about Kevin. And it says something like, oh, Kevin is still emerging, but Kevin hears it as Kevin is still a virgin. And he's got like this absolute unadulterated fear of being seen as a virgin, and he takes it like so personally, and that's why he's like so obsessed with this mission of having sex. But if you do watch the sort of traditional teen films that are led by young lads, their
American
mission,
Pie and that
this
sort
is
of
the
thing.
one I'm thinking of always, right? It's like, let's make a pact so we can all have sex, because apparently that is the most important thing in the world. So he is just kind of I can see where they're coming from.
No, it's world peace.
Yes, exactly. Ending child hunger. And so it's almost like Kevin is the product of these films and of this idea that young lads should be looking to lose their virginity as soon as possible. And if you haven't done that, then you're a loser or something like that. So we've got a pretty good cast in there, I think. Some really, iconic British faces. So like I've already said, Chris Evans, who's brilliant, although I was a bit disappointed that he wasn't doing a Welsh accent and they'd asked him to do a different accent. I was like, oh, but his Welsh accent is so iconic and I love it. You've got Paul Whitehouse and a few other comedians sort of that you would associate kind of very much with British television slotted in there. Great soundtrack, great outfits, great costumes, all this kind of late 90s drifting into the early 20s, like house and garage music and like big loud nightclubs with lights flashing around and stuff. I thought the vibe and the kind of atmosphere that you get when you're in the Ibiza scenes, well, I'm going to say was really realistic. I haven't been to Ibiza, I should say. I know, absolute loser. But I have been to Falaraki and a few of like the Greek resorts, and it wasn't a million miles away from them. And I thought, for the most part, it was quite fun. There was a bit of gross out humour that I wasn't 100% behind, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. But in general, it wasn't awful. And I don't think it was as bad or as insensitive or as tone deaf as I perhaps had assumed it would be, given the subject matter that it is dealing with. What about you, Josh? I'm curious to know as well, is this like the first time you'd seen it in quite a few years?
Yeah, probably. I wouldn't be able to put a number on it. I'd probably say at least 5 years, something like that, at least. As I said, I've seen it loads. It's always on telly. I think I probably had it on DVD or video or something like that. So I have seen it loads and loads of times. Yeah, so it's strange to talk about a film like this, isn't it? Because you sort of feel like you're analysing something that's so daft and silly that you I don't know, maybe you feel like you're trying to find a nugget in there or something like that. But anyway, that's what we're here to do. So I still really enjoyed it. I still find it really funny. Same as you. I still had that affection for the film. I still, I was expecting it to be like, like American Pie, women are objects and all the men are a bit rapey and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and, we'll come on to that aspect of it and there is some stuff there. But what did I like about it? It's still really funny. That subversion of the teenager of, everything is over dramatic and everything is so unfair. And
it is so unfair.
You get asked to do the slightest thing like, do the dishes and I am not your slave,
I am not your slave.
All that sort of thing. And it's still funny. It is still funny. And I did think, well, maybe is it a little bit one note maybe, but I don't think it is. I still think there's some stuff in there that I still think, teenagers are always going to teenage, right? So I know that maybe some of the issues might change around what their barriers are, back in like when I was a teenager, it was get off MSN, now it's get off Minecraft or
get off MySpace.
Yeah, get off the Bebo. But anyway, and I think it's funny for a couple of reasons which you've already touched on. I really enjoy the script, elements of the script, like you say, things like Kevin is a virgin, Kevin is a virgin, or things like that. There's a really funny bit where he shows up to the shopping centre in his jacket, and his jacket's turned inside out, and Perry says to him, why is your jacket turned inside out? And he says something like, I don't conform to stereotypes, or something like that. And then he turns his jacket inside out. Then that's backed up with things like you say, like the costumes, which is, they're just a bit out of date for the time it was made. So they are wearing that like mid-90s clobber, and it would have been out of date by then. And also, it's really, it's bucket hats and trackies and everything's really bright. There's one bit that really made me laugh where they're both wearing a t-shirt that says individual on them. Or individual unique or something like that. I can't remember. But it's things like that. It's obviously a little bit of work has gone into. Because normally, right, these characters are in a couple of minute sketches. So you've always got that risk with TV, especially sketches, of like, well, how do you get a full film out of this? And is it going to become boring? And is it going to become stupid? And I do think they do quite a good job with this of taking them to a place and doing stuff and building up a world to be like, they are sort of idiots and they are sex obsessed. And what they do is they surround them with normal people. So it only highlights how daft they seem to be. And then, of course, you've got the performances, which really carry the film as well. Mainly, like you said, Harry Enfield and Kathy Burke. You've got Harry Enfield playing the bratty, overdramatic Kevin. And then Kathy Burke as well. For me, I think she gives the best performance in it. Not because Harry Enfield's not good, but because, I don't know if you'll weigh in on this, but I forgot that Perry was played by a woman. I think you can. I mean, I know because I've seen it so many times, but you aren't constantly going, Perry's played by a woman there, and it's really funny. She does a really good job of capturing, like you say, that dopey sort of lovable, but also teenage sex obsessed young lad. And I think by the way she walks and the way she talks and the way they make her up and all that stuff, Perry looks like a teenage lad as opposed to a middle-aged woman or however old she was at the time. Again, I'm going to say his name wrong, but Rhys Ifans is really good as the.
Oh, that's pretty good, Josh. I'll give you that. Yeah,
as the maniacal eyeball Paul. I was reading about it, actually. Do you know what he was filming at the same time as this?
Replacements.
It was the Replacements. So one of the scenes, I can't remember when it was, but they had to shoot it really quickly because he was literally on his way to America and back again.
Oh, busy man.
Yeah. But no, overall, I think there's lots to like in there. I can see, I mean, every film is an acquired taste, but I can see how this would be an acquired taste, how someone might look at it. A lot of people when we were at college absolutely loved The Mighty Boosh.
Oh, yeah.
And I never really got it. And it's not that I don't, it's subjective, isn't it? So I think with this, I can see, like, I can imagine showing it to a teenager now and then being like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
But also I can
It's
imagine...
very of its time,
Yeah, it
isn't
is,
it?
but-
Like,
but-
it was appropriate for the time.
Yeah, but I can also imagine people still finding it funny. You know, we still, in my house, same as yours, do things like, have a jam sandwich, Mrs Patterson.
Yeah, Mrs.
Yeah, all that sort of thing. You know, it's the same as, it's, you know, it is in its own way of its time, but also quite timeless. You know, a bit like things like Monty Python or Little Britain or that sort of thing. You know, they're of their time, but they still have a place and people still quote them now. And I think if you've got that warmth and that affection for them, then it still carries on. But, you know, it's all subjective at the end of the day.
I think they did the right thing by keeping it an hour and a half as well, like you said
Yeah.
then, or not even,
Like
right? It's about an hour and
22 or something.
22
Yeah.
minutes, yeah. And like you said then, there is a risk of it becoming a bit one note because we're only used to seeing these characters for very short periods of time. And you do maybe feel that a little bit, but it's not too much and it's not too draining or too exhausting. Like when it gets to the next scene, you don't feel like, oh my God, we're just seeing this again. Like this is just so repetitive. And they did do enough, I think, to sort of keep the momentum going and to not make it feel like a slog. Something else that I did quite appreciate as well is that it really does push the boundaries of awkwardness. So obviously every child's nightmare is the idea of their parents having sex, you know, of their parents doing sexual things and all this. And this is a real strong theme throughout. Now, Kevin and Perry, while they're in Ibiza, because their mum and dad, Kevin's mum and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, have come with them. So they're in one room and they're in another, and Kevin is asleep and Perry is not asleep, and he can hear Mr. and Mrs. Patterson having sex. So he grabs the video camera and then sort of sneaks outside onto the balcony and then starts filming the parents having sex in their bed. And then a few sort of things happen, and basically what happens is Eyeball Paul gets hold of the video. He uses the moaning and the sexual sounds from the video on one of his tracks in the club and then puts the footage up on the huge screen. So Kevin has to see it. Can you think of anything more mortifying? Like,
No.
and I appreciate that they went to that level. It's just like, imagine being a teenager. What is the worst thing you can possibly think of? And then they just did it. And they didn't only do it, they put it on a big fucking screen in the middle of the club for everyone to see. And I was like, that's bold. I like that. This is making me feel so uncomfortable. So obviously the filmmakers are doing something right, I thought.
So we'll move on to talking about things that we perhaps didn't like or that we'd change about the film. So, Alice, anything from you?
Well, so I'm not a huge fan of gross out comedy in general, and there is quite a lot of that happening in this film. The first one is where I think they see like two youngsters having sex or something. They're at a house party and they see two youngsters having sex, or there's a teenage girl who's like got her top off or something, and they start dribbling, and the dribble is like a waterfall from their mouths all the way down to the floor, and the camera really lingers on that for a little bit of time. And I was like, don't like that. And then obviously there's the very famous spot squashing scene, which was quite iconic, I remember at the time. So there are two love interests, is Gemma and Candice, of course, Candice. And so Kevin and Perry meet these two girls they're at like a beach bar or something. And basically they all try and get into the club, but Paul Whitehouse, who plays the bouncer, doesn't let them in the club because he says that their faces offend his mirror because they're too, I'm putting air quotes, ugly, because they're covered in spots and, you know, they haven't maybe done their hair as nice as he would have liked, or they're not wearing enough makeup. So they go away and they have this makeover scene. And it's long. It is long. Like you see them squishing every spot on their face. They've got belly button piercings that are infected, and they squish
it's just rank.
And I know it's props, and I know they're actors, and I know this has all been made up for the film. But I was still like, "Whoa, this is disgusting." And the other thing, really, and this is quite a general thing, but for me, it just wasn't funny enough. I remember watching the sketch show as a kid, and I do remember laughing. Like I've already said, we as a household would watch it all together. It was part of, you know, Saturday night TV or whatever. You got like Blankety Blank, Wheel of Fortune, and then Harry Enfield and Chums would be on. And I remember laughing at the time, but it just wasn't that funny. Like the jokes weren't particularly strong. The characters are very endearing. And I think I already mentioned, a lot of the comedy comes from the fact that it is Harry Enfield and Kathy Burke playing these two teenagers. And then the further you sort of get away from that, there weren't many brilliant jokes. And I just think maybe a few tweaks here and there could have really boosted it, maybe just to be a bit funnier, I don't know, just a bit more big laughs I wanted. I wanted to be like rolling on the floor laughing.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't really at all throughout. What about you, Josh? Was there anything you didn't like or you would change?
I'd agree with with your point a little bit there. So you would say, when you say it's not funny enough, you mean overall, not just the gross out bits, just in general, you sort of wanted it to get past a 5 on the laugh scale or whatever.
Exactly. Like I don't think I laughed out loud at all. And I have laughed out loud for films that we've done previously. So I know it can happen.
Speed
and
to.
it just
Speed
to, hilarious every minute a thigh slapper. And it just didn't happen really for this. And the thing is with stuff like this as well is you can see where they are making the jokes, obviously, and what they are doing for laughs. And if you think back to the sketch show, there was a laughing track in it. So in the film, you can kind of hear where they're expecting the laughing track to be. And it just didn't hit for me. And I don't know, because I did watch it when I was a bit younger, but I couldn't quite remember the sort of finer details of it. And I wonder if I did laugh when I saw it when I was younger, and maybe I've just transcended that a little bit more. I think the more films you watch, some of the funniest shit I've ever seen, like that when I think about funny films, I think about things like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, just floors me every single time. Pop Star, Never Stop, Never Stopping, absolutely hilarious. And more recently, Swiss Army Man, which really did have me laughing out loud. And this just didn't have those things for me. Do you remember any particular jokes from this? Like, was there anything that did make you laugh out loud?
Not in terms, I suppose things like Kevin is a virgin or Kevin is emerging, or the bit where they throw the tickets down and it says Virgin Airlines and that sort of thing. In terms of,
that was quite funny, actually, wasn't it?
In terms of actual jokes, there isn't that many that aren't a bit gross or whatever. So that was probably my main issue, which I'm the same as you. I don't really like gross out comedy. And I think the reason I don't like it is I just think, snobbery alert, but I think it's a bit easy. I think it's easy to do poo jokes, sick jokes, jizz jokes.
As well, doesn't the poo go in his mouth when he's in the
So, and I don't mind some of the stuff, some of the lower end stuff, like, they're constantly getting massive erections. It's cartoonishly funny, but things like the spot popping bit or the sick bit, I feel like are a little easy, and it's almost like because they were stretching out what would be a sketch into a film, they sort of, thought, well, what can we do? And I think that the other thing, which is a really interesting point about you not laughing that much, because I also didn't laugh that much, which is, I suppose you got to ask, who is this for? Is it for the teenagers who are going to laugh at the gross bits, or is it for the parents who are going to see the teenagers? And I think they probably needed to, the sketch show, I don't think there's any question. I think the sketch show is for parents to laugh at teenagers. Whereas this, I don't know. I'm still undecided. The jury's out a little bit. So yeah, I would have liked to have been funnier. It was still okay. I do think it's probably aged quite poorly in some senses. Not as bad as I thought. There's a bit, there's a bit of homophobia and that sort of thing in there. But I think the main issue I thought was, and I'd wonder what you think about this, which is, does it make a bit of a weird point about the female characters, the two female characters in it, the two girls? Is it sort of, they're not attractive until they pop all their spots and do themselves up and spend ages doing themselves up? I mean, what's the point they're making there? Like, is it, I can't, is it a bit, for lack of a better phrase, ugly shaming, or is it, I don't really know. What do you think?
I suppose you could read it as similar to how Kevin and Perry themselves are depicted, is this, societal standard of what we think beauty is and what we think a good-looking girl looks like. Because obviously Kevin and Perry, their characters are taking the piss out of these young lads. And I wonder if with Gemma and Candice, if it's, something similar. It's like, you don't go from sort of ugly to beautiful because you've squished a few spots. And that doesn't really make that much of a difference. And obviously looks and good looks is completely subjective. And Paul Whitehouse's character is not a likable character.
No. And I suppose Kevin and Perry fancy them straight away anyway.
They love them.
So it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it's not making a point. Maybe they just gave them spots because they wanted to do a spot popping scene.
Feels a bit like that, doesn't it? Or maybe they were just like, oh, we need to have like a makeover scene or whatever. But yeah, it was almost like they came up with the gross idea first and they were like, right, well, how do we make this happen? It is so gross.
So we'll move on to the critical reception in a moment because, Alice, I believe you're going to take us on a journey.
Oh, so mysterious and magical, Josh. I love it.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
It has. But we're heading back down there. We're going to go down the rabbit hole for this bit that I'm going to call Alice Down the Rabbit Hole. So, for this segment of Alice Down the Rabbit Hole, we're going to take a deep dive into the life and work of Kevin's love interest, Candice, aka Laura Fraser. You probably couldn't tell in Kevin and Perry, but Laura was born and raised in Glasgow. Like many British actors, she started out in some of our cultural staples, Casualty, Taggart, etc., and also dabbled in the world of film. She eventually hopped over the pond, and eagle-eyed Breaking Bad fans may have recognised her as Lydia Rodart Quayle, who featured prominently in Series 5 and made a few appearances in Better Call Saul. Laura had previously said that she just absolutely loves acting, but almost quit a few times in her 20s after being told time and again to lose weight, even though she was already pretty thin. But she said not even trying to do the thing she loves always felt worse, which is probably why she stayed busy since 1995 with a colourful career across film and television. And that was Alice Down the Rabbit Hole.
I'm so glad I didn't mention that she was in Breaking Bad because I noticed that.
Oh, were you going to say that?
But she's also in A Knight's Tale.
Oh, she is. Yeah, she's in quite a few things.
The blacksmith in A Knight's Tale, isn't she? Yeah. She's always good.
Yeah. And I do. So I'm not like super afraid with Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul or whatever. So I had no idea kind of who she was and this amazing career that she'd had. So I was really excited when I started going down that rabbit hole, which is why I call it Down the Rabbit Hole. It all comes back around, doesn't it? So we'll move on now then to talking about the critical reception. So, Josh, what are you thinking? If you were going to hazard a guess at what this got, obviously I've already mentioned the 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I do believe may be in part due to a very limited number of reviews it had. I believe it was 6. But what would you think if you're thinking IMDb and if you're thinking about the audience?
So even before you mentioned that at the beginning, I figured this probably didn't do that well because I just can't imagine critics particularly liking this. And I know we talked about this before, that a lot of critics have a bit of a tin ear for comedy, or a bit of a, they like the higher brow comedies, your Wes Andersons, that sort of thing. So I don't imagine it did that well. However, with the audience, probably quite mixed. I'd love to know how this went down in America if it came out there, because I can't imagine them. And I know there's a lot of gross out comedy in America, but it's pretty weird, isn't it? I can't imagine them really getting it. But I don't know. How do I think it did? I'd probably say middling to low. So like a 5, 4, between a 4. So let's say 4.5 out of 10, average across all the platforms. So Go on, give it to me.
Well, at the time of recording, it got a 5.6 on IMDb, so you're pretty much bang on there. And then, so for the Rotten Tomatoes audience score, it got 70%.
Wow.
Which I thought was quite high.
Yeah,
and I'll be honest, that was a bit higher than what I was expecting. And that was with over 10,000 ratings. So the audience have gone out of their way to rate it. And it's like the critics have just said, nah, not doing it.
That's tough then. So so it's 56% and 70%. Mm-hmm. So like probably averages out about 60%, doesn't it?
Say 6, yeah.
So
I don't think that is underrated. I would probably say that's maybe adequately rated, but I would wholeheartedly say that it is underseen. And I think it is quite specific to a certain sort of category of people. And I don't really think it's one that like youngsters these days would be watching.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say it probably is appropriately rated and maybe underseen because it's perhaps, worth a look for people who've not seen it, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. Another one for the underseen and appropriately rated vault. It's a specific one that there's not. Is there anything else in there? I can't.
I reckon there's a couple. I think there's a couple in there. Yeah, but a small collection.
And Kevin and Perry is part of that collection. There will be another episode next week. We don't know what it's going to be because we might, Alice, be joined by a guest.
Oh, very exciting. Love a guest.
But we might not because I haven't sorted it out yet.
So well.
Yeah. So join us next week when we'll hopefully be joined by a guest. If not, another film. What will that be? Well, you'll find out, won't you? Because you'll hopefully click subscribe. And if you've not, please click subscribe now. If you've got your phone in your hand as well, you could scooch on over to the iTunes store and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It would be very, very much appreciated. If you'd like to get in touch with us, it's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias. Just search for Just Films and That and you will find us. Alice Oliver, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Josh. I've had a lovely time.
And how are you having it, Alice?
I'm having it large.
Yeah, like the film.
That was solid. I definitely understood what was going on there. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. Oh well. and it's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.